The world is more uncertain than ever before. Brexit, Trump's election, and a spendthrift government. Gold money is the antidote. With Gold Money, you can transfer gold for free to other Gold Money members, spend gold with the Gold Money MasterCard, and best of all, you can redeem your gold grams for coins, cubes, and bars. Use the Kennedy Financial Gold Money affiliate link in the description box below and start owning real money today. All right, welcome back from the break, and as promised, this week's guest, Bill Murphy. Bill Murphy from the Le Metropole Cafe, as well as the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. Thank you for coming on Kennedy Financial.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Philip.
Well, like I was telling you in the pre-interview, I've been following you for a long time. You're a hero in my eyes. You've been fighting the good fight. Obviously, we talk about gold and silver and the manipulation that's been taking place for many years now here on Kennedy Financial. There isn't a week that goes by that we don't talk about it. But, I have to ask a devil's advocate question. Even those folks in our community who believe gold and silver are manipulated, mostly always to the downside, they might be losing faith. And they might succumb to the idea, why should I try to protect myself with precious metals when the manipulators can just always hold them down? So that's my question for you. If gold and silver is always going to get smashed and we're never going to see the fruits of our research pay off in the long run, why should we continue to protect ourselves with gold and silver?
Well, it's a good question. And first, if I may, just for some of your listeners, GATA was formed to expose the manipulation of the gold market by the bullion banks. And then we realized it was much bigger than we thought. It included the Fed, the Treasury, the Bank for International Settlements, other central banks, Exchange Stabilization Fund, and so on. And so they've got some might behind them. You're right. But for me, the number one thing to know for big picture thinkers is what GATA knows about how suppressed the gold market and silver markets are. And what I mean is that they've taken them to artificially low prices. My good friend, James Turk of goldmoney.com, said that gold, if it just kept up with inflation, it would be $3,300 an ounce. That's without all these other issues. So think about it. You've got a gold market at $1,270 an ounce. And it's so far underpriced. And what's going to happen is, think of it like a slingshot. It's the slingshot being drawn way back and back. And the gold cartel is going to lose control of their manipulation. And the prices are going to react like Newton's law of equal and opposite reaction and go bonkers. And the number one thing to know is why gold and silver are at these prices. Again, they're artificially low. I don't think it's going to last too much longer. And they're going to reach a tipping point in which they can't keep doing what they're doing. And the returns, and we get into it in a little bit, on silver, I think are going to be staggering. Right.
Well, you mentioned, silver. What other commodity out there can you buy that's still below its 1980 high price, right? And that's why in my little book that people can get for free on my website, Financial Judo, I say, if you're just a middle-class person like we are, I would be loading up on silver, to be honest. Get physical silver eagles, maybe, dabble in the silver stocks a little bit too, if that's something one is interested in. But you're right. I mean, silver obviously has the upside potential of gold on steroids. Now, I think how I want to set the stage for my next question, and please bear with me, and my audience has heard me make this comparison before, but I think there are so many lessons to be learned from the 2008 financial crisis. And as Warren Buffett even says, when the tide goes out, we see who's swimming naked. We all found out that Bernie Madoff was swimming naked and had been for quite some time. So that was like the biggest Ponzi scheme ever uncovered to date. But there were people who knew that that was a Ponzi scheme. And one notable character is Harry Markopolos. And he was, pounding the table, begging the SEC, hey, you need to take a look at this. And 8 long years went by, and this was like a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. You and I would agree that the scheme to manipulate gold and silver to the downside is much bigger. The losses due to fraud are much greater, and the players whose reputations are at stake are even bigger than Bernie Madoff. So if Bernie Madoff was able to keep that scheme going for so long, how long can this scheme last?
Well, his was what, 8 or 9 years? This has already been 18 for
Right.
us.
Right.
I mean, we knew right away. I've been to Congress, spoken to the Speaker of the House, the subcommittee on monetary policy, and Ron Paul, and all kinds of people. And it's gone on far longer than we thought it would. But the Madoff scandal blew up. And just for example, like Enron, if you remember the energy company, I think Fortune magazine had it Company of the Year, 5 years in a row, Company of the Year. And it was a total scam, a fraud. And of course, they've only become scandals. And the people that tried to expose that were fired. So and the difference here is what you said. We're going against the richest, most powerful people in the world. And one of the reasons that we can't get any place is because the U.S. government's behind it. And quite frankly, legally, they can do what they're doing. The fraud is not making it known and lying about it. That's what's going to make it such a big scandal. But behind the scenes, they have a right to do whatever they want to do. But that's why they won't answer any questions about it. We've asked Fed Governor Dudley recently about gold swaps. He almost had a panic. The press won't talk about it. As Chris Powell, my colleague, says, the United States would rather reveal its nuclear secrets than its gold secrets. And it's this big a deal. It was started back in Robert Rubin's time. There was strong dollar policy, and no one ever explained what the strong dollar policy was. The essence of it was to rig the gold price. But anyway, we could go on, but it's going to blow up, and I'm pretty sure of it because they're going to run out of enough physical gold and silver to keep the physical market down at these low prices. And the whole thing will then just start to blow up. And because there's a scandal here now of what they call hypothecated gold, where people are trading the same gold over and over again on the same ownership, and things like this, that eventually you're going to get a black swan, a derivatives crisis of some sort, and it's going to feed on itself. Think of it as a nuclear reaction. It's just going to, and when it goes, it's going to go nuts. So, and that's when the fraud will be exposed. It won't be until then, just like Madoff and Enron, until they blew up, no matter what people said, nobody would do anything about it. And it will be the same thing in the gold and silver markets.
So what do you think that'll look like when it finally comes to fruition, when the cartel loses control? Is this something that'll take place? We'll go to bed one night and wake up and instantly everything will be different? Or do you think it'll take place over the course of weeks and months? And then to add on to that, I make the argument to some people, look, if something happens within a reasonable amount of time, like, Peter Schiff, a guy like him calling the financial crisis, that happened in a reasonable amount of time. If it took another 100 years, you'd say, well, that person was wrong. So how much longer do we have? Like, do you think they can make this last till 2030, 2040? I mean, what are we looking at?
I think we're on the cusp of it, perhaps right now, starting in the sense of what's going on in the markets. The pressure is building up on the gold cartel, and I honestly think it's going to kick in sometime this year. I would give it no more than next year. They've gone way beyond what it should have. And again, from the physical markets, I think are going to seize up on them. And yes, it could happen overnight, or it could happen, boom, 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 boom. But there'll start to be some things in the market which are going to just shock people. I think it'll start in silver because that's their kryptonite. They're running out of enough physical silver to keep the price down at these levels. And they're going all out right now, stopping it at 1850. They're going bonkers, actually. But the real key will be when it takes out 21. And if I think when it takes out 21, it can go up faster than anybody can imagine. And it's going to be very exciting.
Were you surprised at how it got all the way down into the teens? I mean, frankly, I was. I was buying in the 30s when it fell from 50, and I thought that was a great buy. Obviously, I was buying even more when it got into the teens. But to me, that really just showed me just how powerful the cartel really was to be able to push it down that low. But what were your thoughts as that was going on? Now it's rebounded.
Well, it's hopefully, again, both of these markets are just beginning to break out again after 5-6 years of a nightmare, quite frankly. And yeah, I didn't think we'd go down to these levels. I mean, as you said earlier, I mean, silver just recently $17, 1/3 of the price it was in 1980. He said, no, there's nothing like that in the world. But again, Newton's law, this is so bad, egregious, what they've done in silver, that once they lose control of this, and they're going to, you're going to see a moonshot from 50 and then to 100.
We had a question about silver from a listener, and since we're on the topic, I figured I'd ask it now. Actually, it was about gold and silver in general, but I think it relates more to silver because Keith Neumeyer has come out recently, and he's like one of the only mining CEOs to do this. But the question from our listener Jason ask Bill why precious metals miners won't complain about the paper price manipulation when they can be bankrupted by it.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you mentioned Keith. He's a class act guy, and I've had good fortune to entertain him at my place in Vancouver when I lived up there, and I've seen him speak many times, and he's got a great team around him, and he's just courageous enough to talk out, and the rest of them a bunch of lightweights in this area. And again, if you take God's point of view, you're taking on all the money and power in the world, and these guys get big salaries that are running these companies. And to be fair to them, a lot of them have to get permits from governments. They're lending from the bullion banks that are killing them. So, and they want to be a part of the establishment. And so they're petrified of going there. I mean, this situation, and here you have the World Gold Council. This is supposed to represent the gold people, the producers all around the world, and do their bidding for them like other trade organizations. Well, myself, John Embry, of Sprott Asset Management, my colleague Chris Powell went to see the World Gold Council in 2010. And the only way they would see us, and we met the top guy there, we had to sign something that said we were never there. We're trying to help the gold industry, help them.
Right.
And they won't even, it's so bad they won't even let it be known we saw them. So this is what the whole thing is, everybody's up against.
Well, this is why I say when this movie is finally made and this book is written, it'll be called The Biggest Short. In the vein of The Big Short. And anyone who saw that movie knows the scene. There's the girl and she works for the SEC and she's at the poolside there at the Mortgage Bankers Association event. And she's trying to get a job with some firm. And really that's what continues to go on today. And it's only people like yourself and other guests that we've had on the show, trying to fight this good fight and say, hey, look, a fraud is a fraud and we got to call it what it is. In the meantime, gold and silver are having a good year. I think that, and this is just a back of the cocktail napkin numbers that I was doing before the show. I know some of our smarter listeners and viewers will probably catch me, but the Huey appears to be up 20%. I think gold is up 10% year to date. And meanwhile, the market, the S&P and the Dow are only up 3%. That said, though, your colleague Chris Powell has been quoted as saying, we no longer have markets, we only have interventions. I repeat that quote all the time. What did he mean by that?
Well, Chris was we were beginning to realize that other markets were being manipulated. And Chris came out with a great line and basically the markets are all rigged. We know about gold and silver. We don't have to go there, but the bond market in the United States is generally acknowledged as a managed market and so on. But then you've got the plunge protection team and something called the counterparty risk management group that's all over the stock market, moving it to where it wants to go. I mean, the LIBOR rate, there was a LIBOR interest scandal, which is that's a short-term interest rate overseas and in London, a huge scandal about rigging that market. The currency traders over there just paid $5.8 billion or something for rigging the currency markets.
Right.
All the markets are rigged and managed, and they've got the money and power behind the scenes saying we've got to keep under control. And part of it, I think, is that things are really far worse than what they want to get into, whether you go into the debt issue, which doesn't even get discussed hardly anymore. None of this stuff. And they just want to manage the markets and keep them elevated. And I think, and it's one reason they want to keep the gold and silver prices down. It has to do with the dollar and interest rates and other things. And I think you're getting to that tipping point, a pressure cooker situation where things are all going to change. I can't get into the market too much because if we're going to reinflate the system like I think we're doing, there's no telling what that can do. But what I'm absolutely sure of is that gold and silver are going to start to really take off.
Well, I think you're right that this is going to happen sooner rather than later. One of the things I talked about in my book was the Dow gold ratio. And again, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And during the Great Depression, we saw the Dow gold ratio get down to 2. During the late 70s, early 80s, we saw it get all the way down to 1. And both times that happened from top to bottom, you could draw a 95-degree line. Excuse me. And that's where they met both times. So I'm looking at the top back in 2000. And if you draw a 95-degree line, it hits around 2018. So I've been saying for a while, I think, it could happen next year, but certainly by the end of this decade, and I've been putting my name on it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you got it nailed. And as I said, I'll be surprised if we're not really on the move big time this year. And it all will depend on that loss of control. If market forces overwhelm them, things, the black swans that, the things that you never heard of, and the next thing you know, all heck breaks loose. You mentioned 2008 and so on, of course, and the Big Short. Well, they were talking about it. The guys that were talking about it almost went broke, going short the market and short in the area that they felt was going to collapse because it just kept going against them. And of course, then everything turned their way. And the same thing is going to happen here, except on a much, much bigger scale. And the question is whether a gold and silver explosion and the scandal that comes out of it eventually, that's going to come down the road. Will it affect other markets, or will it be symbolic of other markets doing what you think, which, where the stock market, I think is what you're saying, gets crucified and the gold price overtakes the stock market price. And I can see that happening, sure.
Yeah, well, they're definitely not going to make it easy on us, and they haven't made it easy on us. We saw gold get all the way up to 1900, and then it didn't quite make it below 1,000, but that's a huge loss, and I think it shook out a lot of weak hands. And we're going to see lots of gyrations to the upside in the meantime. But for those who've had the commitment to stay firm, now's not the time to lose faith, in my opinion. I think we've already rode some pretty rough seas to this point, and now, just like you mentioned in the movie The Big Short, when here they know they're holding the winning hand, but Wall Street and the powers that be are doing everything they can to make them give up. So that's kind of the point we're in right now.
Well, it's interesting. After the election, it's my opinion that this money behind the scenes, they were petrified of Donald Trump winning, because none of them ahead of time said that if he wins, it's going to be good for the market. They all said it's going to be great for gold, bad for the market. And as we know, right after the election, the stock market began to tank, gold went to go up, and by the morning, everything had reversed. And from that, gold went taken straight down, and the stock market has been taken straight up, thousands of points. This is just my opinion, not Gada's now. They're so petrified of what's going on behind the scene and losing control of things. And with a Trump in their presidency, they had to go all out to change the whole perception of what was going on. And that's where we are now. And it could get out of control faster than people think. Lately, whether you're a Trump fan or not, it's not the subject. But as a normal just president, he's having some issues, which anybody would have, whether you like him or not. But with what's going on, all things combined, and where gold and silver are, because of what they did after the Trump win, taking gold down, the interest in gold and silver right now, from the retail standpoint in the United States, is the lowest in 20 years, or was recently. The worst.
Right.
So that's what they were able to do. Now, that could change very quickly as the fear trade comes back into gold and silver. People go, oh, my gosh. And I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, some of these mining stocks are like pearls on the beach, and the tide is out, and you were looking around, and gosh, nobody wants to pick these things up. Another thing I wanted to reiterate that we heard with our last guest, Dr. Ron Paul, he said, in the early 80s or the late 70s, Volcker was running out of a meeting because he wanted to see what the gold price was, as, the price of gold in dollars was heading towards 800. So just another example, for a very long time, probably as far as we go back in the nation's history, they've always paid attention to the price of gold in dollars, because it's almost like the canary in the coal mine, right? So if suddenly we were to wake up and gold is $5,000, that's a clue to everyone that they haven't done a very good job of managing the currency.
Well, that's right. And Paul Volcker has publicly said gold up is bad, gold down is good. And that's exactly what he said. And he's actually gone on in some of his memoirs saying he wished he had rigged the gold price.
Well, that's probably a clue, right? He probably had some notes for his successors.
That's right.
We got a question from Tom. Tom asks, will Trump single-handedly cause a massive silver-gold explosion?
he gets involved in so much emotional, talk because people either love him or they don't like him at all, to put it mildly. So it's hard to say, but what I go from is that Bill Clinton, another quote, said, "I didn't realize I wouldn't be running the show when I became president." And
right.
That's a fact, what he said. So, what the question is, what perception people have about Trump and what his enemies try to go after him for. In other words, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you can't do this, you do that. And he does have a mercurial personality, to put it mildly, so you never know what could happen. And in terms of people's perceptions, what I am sure of, that what's coming is the fear trade coming back into gold for many reasons, which we've discussed, in good part. So that's what I think. Anything that he does or someone else does to fuel that is going to get people buying physical gold and silver.
So one thing I have to talk to you about is digital currencies, and I'm going to do it in this context. Ethereum, which is second in market cap to Bitcoin, has seen a price increase in the last several months from like $7 all the way up to over 50. And to me, this is what silver probably would do if the lid were ever taken off of it. It would probably go up by 500 or 600% in a very short period of time. So, we're in a community where we believe gold and silver are money. They have been for thousands of years. There's this new thing called the digital currency, and it doesn't have much history. We really don't know where these things are going to go. We don't know, who's going to win. How do we know Bitcoin is the gold standard, right? But what are your thoughts there in terms of, this is one area where we actually are seeing a real free market in digital currencies?
That's a good point about the free market, too. I'm thrilled for the Bitcoin people. I know Trace Meyer way back was one of the initial people involved in it. Back in, we came to our GATA conference in Washington in 2008, and I'm so happy that they've all done so well, and good for them. I was just at Jeff Berwick's conference in Acapulco, and all the Bitcoin people were there, a lot of them, and of course they're all happy, and I'm disgusted, and I said, geez, I want to be like these guys again. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely correct. Silver is going to do what the other digital currency just did, in my opinion, once it takes out 21. It's going to go up. It easily could go up sevenfold. And a good example of how bad the situation is there, the silver open interest right now is at an all-time high. That's the number of longs and shorts on the COMEX participating in the market. With the price at 1850, they're going berserk trying to stop it. And so if the physical market is tightening up like I think it's going to, they're going to get trapped short. And once we take out 21, you can have a short squeeze like never seen before in markets. Especially a major market. And it could go bonkers. And that's why I think it go up over a period of time as the gold cartel and JP Morgan, the big shorts, are just forced to give up the ghost. And that's exactly what I see coming, a market just like that.
Well, Bill, this has been highly informative. Where can viewers, listeners continue to follow your work and hear your thoughts on a week-to-week basis?
Well, my colleague Chris Powell just got back from Hong Kong. He does a great job. They can get on his list and puts out stuff all the time. And I have a website called themetropolcafe.com, and people can sign up for a 2-week free trial and see if it's of value to them. And, we've been at this a long time, and I've met a lot of great people like yourself, and that's been the best part of really what we've done here.
Well, as I mentioned, Harry Markopolos was the hero in the Madoff story, and he eventually was presented the Fraud Fighter of the Year award by the ACFE. I truly hope there comes a day when you stand up before the ACFE and this manipulation ends, and I'll be there to congratulate you. We'll all be happy to see this fraud come to an end. But Bill Murphy of GATA and Le Metropole Cafe, thank you for coming on Kennedy Financial.
Thank you. Anytime, Philip.